Hi, welcome to Masquerade Breach, Don't Tell the Camarilla, where we try our best even in distress. I'm one of your hosts, Catherine Cosplays, or Krisha, doing great today. We also have Blaze, we
Hello.
have Goob, we have Jasper, and we got Ocean. I'm sorry I couldn't be here last week. There were some issues that I was having.
That's quite all right. That was an
But
introduction. I love it.
But I am so excited to get into the book Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, originally published in 1872. And there is no evidence, concrete evidence, but you can really tell this was one of the main inspirations for Dracula, the most famous vampire of literature.
Yeah, he's
So-
the vampire ever.
Before we get into the meat of tonight's episode, I believe an introduction is in order, and somebody had some notes in the cover of one of the books or something like that, or something they wanted to talk about.
No.
Sorry, I love books so much. So I'm like, oh my god, this is my jam! When we talk about Dracula, I'm just gonna be like shaking the whole time of like excitement. So I'm gonna read the book. So I'm gonna read the summary of Carmilla in the book jacket. So, in an isolated castle deep in the Austrian forest, Laura leads a solitary life with only her ailing father for company. Until one moonlit night, a horse-drawn carriage crashes into view, carrying an unexpected guest, the beautiful Carmilla. So begins a feverish friendship between Lara and her mysterious, entrancing companion. But as Carmilla becomes increasingly strange and volatile, prone to eerie nocturnal wanderings, Laura finds herself tormented by nightmares and growing weaker by the day. Predating Dracula by 26 years, Carmilla is the original vampire story steeped in sexual tension and gothic romance.
And how?
Well, it is.
You don't say.
So this is the back. So to get into the meat and potatoes of this, Sheridan Le Fanu was an Irish writer of Gothic tales, mysterious novels, and ghost stories. Most famous for his novel Uncle Silas, Carmilla. Sorry, just messed up there. For his novel Uncle Silas. Carmilla was first published in 1872 and has served as an inspiration for countless books, from Bram Stoker's Dracula to Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, and a slew of films such as Hammer Horror's Karnstein trilogy. So, yeah. I have just taking the mic for a sec. I have so much I can say about this book. I mean, like, vampire literature. This is my specialty. I'm the book person. I love this. I've read Carmilla countless times. I reread it twice as well, Ocean, for this podcast. And genuinely just it means the world. It means the world to me because it's like it's one of the first mentions of vampire in Gothic literature. When I describe Gothic literature, I describe if Bram Stoker's Dracula was the Roman Empire, like if you're talking about history, then Carmilla is the Greek. Like ancient Greece. Like straight up just an incredible pillar in Gothic literature.
Who wants to add to that?
So
I would love to add, or mostly just a question to field the group. What's with these Irish writers, man? Because Bram Stoker was also
Oh
Irish.
my god.
They're all the vampire writers are just very Irish.
You're amazingly Irish.
I can answer that.
Yeah,
But I want to give other people opportunity to talk because I feel like I'm stealing it.
Well, okay.
No.
So from my understanding of the book, the read is if you can get past the first portion of it, it's a really good read. There's some times and things that make me go cringe about it, and that's only because of like a couple of statements the father makes at the very beginning. As we all know that there's some racism in there that we really don't want to touch on. But other than that, I got a lot of the idea of that this was a very conservative book at first. Well, at least the father's very conservative, which means that the next part sets up to a very, very taboo subject. That this was something that you obviously don't get, especially in this area, especially during this time. It was considered something that was definitely out of the mainstream during the time. So the idea of it was that it had at some point where the time for it came in, and then it was only briefly touched on, and then the rest was essentially a setup that this is a taboo story, that this is an erotica that is not meant for mainstream, and considering the culture then and the culture now, it's a bit more accepting now than it was then. So
So,
you have to take it with a grain of salt in that aspect, um, because of the time of when it was written, when the author's time frame and all that. So,
was it just me, or did anyone else get? Has any? So I want to just ask here. Like, we haven't covered this media yet, but just out of curiosity, has anyone seen Let the Right One In?
Nope.
was that was that
It's
an
the one with the
adaptation of
small.
Let Me In?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
the original It's the original version of it before
I've
it was
seen it.
I know
translated.
of it. I've never seen it.
I've
I've
watched it.
never seen
Yes,
it either.
I haven't read it yet.
Okay, I've seen it a couple. I've seen Let the Right One In a couple of times, and I've seen Let Me In a couple of times now because I wanted to see both versions of it. For those of you that have seen it, did anyone get Let the Right One In vibes from Chapter 6?
A little bit. Yeah,
Okay, so it's not just
little
me.
bit. Which means the inspiration could have been coming from it.
Well, with this
Probably
being
would have
the,
been.
like, primary source, like the original source for vampire literature, all things considered, in what could be considered modern day, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Somebody else go.
I mean, I read it just once, and I was like, I'm not okay. So here's the deal. I am a book person. I have always loved books. It just depends on how I read them and what time I read them, or listen to audiobooks. When I listened to the audiobook that I listened to, I was just like, okay, this is just. When I read to the first part of the book, I was just like, oh my god, this is so freaking boring. I'm sorry. It just got because of the voice, and it was just like, oh. I was just like kept on listening to it. I'm like, but then like we kind of went into like, oh my god, Carmilla and Laura, and we are just like gay, gay. I was like, yeah, gay. I was like,
Gay!
yeah, make it gay. But overall, once we get to like probably the second half of the book, it got interesting, and I did enjoy it. I wouldn't put it as my top favorites, but I did like it at the end. The end, overall.
I get why it's a classic. I get
Yeah,
why it's time honored and treasured, but much like you, I would not pit it as like my top. I wouldn't put it in my top 10. That being said, specifically because of the subject that it deals with and the story that it tells, I can honestly say this is something I want for my shelf. because it is one of those time-honored treasures, and not to have one just seems an absolute shame given what it represents and what it spawned effectively.
I
And
do agree
and
with that.
and to
I
go
do agree.
off of to go off on that, one of the things that it kind of opens the door to even the psychology of a vampire and the psychology of a person that's going through, at least from the narrator's point of view, in the story, not necessarily the author, but the narrator, um, and how she dealt with being gaslit, being verbally abused and mentally abused in that process. It shows kind of the effects of spousal abuse in a lot of ways. So it revealed that in a very unique way. Not as fantastic, but is in itself um, an aberration of what not to do in a relationship. So yeah, it was an interesting take on something that is just as much true today as it is back then.
I
Anyone
think
else?
that's what's oh, I think that's what's so interesting about the point of view being Laura, who's 19, and she's like quite the ignorant, peaceful, has not lost her innocence, child-esque figure in this, where everything about her life is good. Her father has shielded her from the outside world because they live in a castle in the middle of nowhere, and the only other friends she has are other girls similar to her situation that come by every once in a while. So it is so interesting to read, and even though you and the little tiniest detail. Wait, can you not hear me?
No, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, you were just going like this, so I got
Yeah,
concerned. Anyway,
because I'm hearing some reverb on my end and it's mine.
okay. So there's one instance that is so like stands out when you said that because that's such an interesting take. There's a part of it where it's when Carmilla really starts drinking and taking life from Laura and she's getting like so incredibly ill. And the one thing is like her family is seeing this drastic change in her, and they ask like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And the one thing like Laura says is, I knew in my head I was in danger and I was ill and I was sick. But for some reason I could never say it and I always told them I'm fine. Like that,
Yeah,
and adding that element to it, and like also, and like the parts where the like hypnosis would break and Laura remembers like a snippet of something Carmela said or something she did, but then again the gaslighting of that didn't happen. What are you talking about? Like for so that is such an interesting point. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say something and my thought is gone.
Oof.
Yeah, to build off of Krisha's thing, I really like how Carmilla is just Dracula told from the perspective of Lucy and also Dracula's a woman.
Yes. Yes.
That's pretty
Yes.
much it.
Well, considering everything that's been going on, you have a couple of different things placed out here. Obviously, you have the idea of a very naive, sheltered girl who had a situation that happened to her when she was younger that
Yeah.
that it was almost like a deja vu effect that happened. I think that's something important uh, to to manifest, that this was some foreshadowing that was occurring for us to read into. and then we, of course, start to see it for what it is. I think one of the things that I have delved into the research of this book was that a lot of them said if I had known, if I would have picked this book up and read it had I not known it was a vampire book. The idea that the moment that you know it's a vampire is the moment that the illusion is broken in a lot of ways, because you know already that the monster is a vampire, but at the same time it comes with its own diatribe of there was a mystery in this book that had you not known the ending, had you not known it was a vampire, would have probably made it a lot better to read.
I actually agree with that. I think that if I hadn't known, it would have packed more of a punch for me, and I would have actually been drawn into it. Looking at it from the point of going into it knowing it is classical vampire media, I think does a bit of a disservice. But at the same time, it gives you a chance to analyze things. Like, gives you a chance to look for weak spots. It gives you a chance to look at how they are portraying this creature. It gives you a chance to look at all sorts of things from all sorts of various aspects. And for me, I want to say, knowing that it's vampire media is something that unfortunately may have ruined it for me.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah. I think that's something that
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, had they not known it was a vampire book, would have picked this up and loved it. I guarantee you that's why it became so popular when he first wrote it and published. So,
Well,
go ahead.
sorry. I think what's fascinating is that at the time, Carmilla breaks a lot of like gender norms that was expected in literature at the time, because she is the predator. She is the one causing, like, she's not the sweet innocent damsel. She is actively taking a role and plotting, like using her beauty and using her youth to her advantage to kill people. And like that's so fascinating because we in for years and years later of vampire media, there are no women who take real center stage. Like Dracula's wives in Dracula are just wives. They don't even have names. They don't even have descriptions. Like it's and so Carmilla like is for the longest time, like it's so interesting that like her dynamic inspired Dracula because she was like using that beauty and that look of innocence to her advantage is, and then also it suggests that there is a whole vampire network, because who is the woman who was in the carriage with her, who was
Which
like
is what I
giving
want to
her
know.
off to these lords, like that, even like, well, who is that? And going off of that, I think I may be the opposite of you guys, where knowing it's a vampire, you're like screaming in your head, like, what is wrong with you? It's like, so if it quacks like a duck, and it looks like a duck, and it has feet like a duck, and it swims like a duck,
It must be a duck.
like, you have all
It must
the
be a dog.
evidence. Exactly.
I mean,
Um,
I think. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess some of the similarities between Bram Stoker's Dracula and uh, Carmilla is an interesting aspect. Where yes, naivety is part and play with Carmilla. It's not so much registered in Bram Stoker's Dracula. In fact, quite a bit of it is just you see tomfoolery with Bram Stoker's Dracula, where you see naivety and just not knowing with Carmilla.
I like that I like that the author used the appearance of cowardice, innocence, naivety, and the mirroring of events. If I picked up on that right, whereas was it Laura experienced the thing. It was Carmilla that was saying, I experienced this, this, and this over like throughout the nights and whatnot, in order to throw off suspicion, in order to redirect and misdirect. And if you didn't know that going in, like if you weren't expecting something like that going in, I think that would have been huge. Like that was pretty well done.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I think that's what the narrator was setting up for, was that whole idea that she's experiencing it as well and resonating. I think was the idea was to resonate with Laura. And I think that was something that a lot of people seem to get kind of thrown off with. And the idea that if not knowing would have made that a lot better. It throws off suspicion in a lot of ways when it comes to not knowing what this book is about and who Carmilla is and everything.
So what else have we got for Carmilla? Like, this is something that has been around. You said it was what?
1872.
1872. We are currently 2024. Does anybody know offhand what the math is on that?
A lot.
It's over
Nice.
100 years.
It's 1,000. No, it's
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 over.
nine.
over.
It's nine.
It's over 9,000.
I have the
It's
actual
over
math done. If
900.
anybody, it's 72, right?
Yeah.
1872.
Yeah.
152 years.
So
Yeah.
152 years at this point. This has been around for almost 2 centuries. Like we're 3/4 of the way there to 2 centuries, which means obviously this has lasted. This is tried, tested, and true. It's borne the test of time, hands down. It's one of those things that's almost timeless. I think it's definitely a story you have to experience for yourself. And up until I had listened to it, this was actually the first time I had listened or read this story, because I use the audiobook. I'm not going to lie. I use the audiobook on Spotify. And speaking of which, if you're a Spotify premium member, apparently you get up to like 15 hours per month of audiobook listening time, which is kind of cool. So I can take it with me wherever I go, which is awesome. I think it's something you're definitely going to have to experience for yourself. And I kind of don't want to give too much away here. Like, this is an experience.
I think it's one of those stories that, like, it stands the test of time. And it's even like, well, for me it is one of those books where like I can reread it over and over again.
Yeah.
And like I still get like the chills every time. So can I give a bit of history and background to this story?
I don't have an issue. Anyone else?
No,
Nope.
no, go
Go
for
for
it.
it.
A lot of it is in comparison to Bram Stoker's Dracula, because that's like the big literary debate of, did it actually inspire Dracula? There is inarguable evidence that Bram Stoker and like Sheridan Le Fanu knew each other, to the point where Bram Stoker, in starting out his literary career, worked at the newspaper that Sheridan Le Fanu owned. They knew each other. Bram Stoker worked under Le Fanu. It's nuts. Also, Dracula was originally supposed to be set in England. Dracula was originally supposed to be like an English count or like an English lord, but because Carmilla was inspired by the story of Elizabeth Bathory and putting it in this area of Austria, that's what inspired Bram Stoker to put his story in the area of Transylvania and following Count Dracula and his tale and Vlad Tepes and all of that, because these really famous people who did vampiric things in their lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
You can't deny that. Sheridan Le Fanu was actually inspired by the poem Christabel by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And it's literally the story of Carmilla. It's of a girl who named Christabel who finds a woman in the woods who's in distress, and she's like, "Oh my god, bestie." And then
Bestie.
"Oh my god, bestie." And then they travel along together, and slowly Christabel discovers, "Oh shit." However, it's so like heartbreaking because Christabel, like, again, using history references, Christabel is like Mesopotamia of Gothic literature, because this poor poem was never finished because Coleridge thought, "Oh, nobody's gonna like this," so he never finished it. And
Lies.
unfortunately, it became so popular after he passed.
Oh.
Like, to the point where at the getaway, like, you know how Frankenstein was written along with other like really classic horror stories because they were all snowed in a lodge. So wait, is this not known?
I knew this, but I don't think other
So
people.
Mary Shelley is the one who wrote the story of Frankenstein. So she and a couple other people went on vacation. However, they got snowed in at their lodge, so they couldn't leave. So they're all writers and they all love horror stories. So they read Christabel. And then they were like, "Oh, let's see who can write the most scary story." So Mary Shelley went into her room. She wrote Frankenstein. Other, like, I can't remember the other stories that came out of this snow-in, but these really famous stories inspired by Christabel and the classic horror tenets that we hold to this day. There's so much rich history about this. Genuinely, I love it. I'm just gonna keep saying I love it because it's, and also fangs. Fangs are first mentioned in Carmilla. Vampires did not have fangs before. Carmilla is the first literary work that specifically mentions that, oh, this girl has weird teeth. That's odd.
Yep.
No cause for concern. Maybe she just has teeth that are weird.
Insert straw sucking sound here.
This girl's got weird teeth. Must be the climate. Bum bum bum. Like, that's literally. Oh, but it's also the fact that she like plays. Her strategy for getting into people's homes is just so neat. Because she's just like, "Oh no, I'm lost, and my mother. Oh no!" So these poor people are like, "Oh, come into our house." So she's like, "Oh, cool, I got invited in. Hell yeah!" Like,
And that's the weird part because like it was the premise of its setup was an interesting one. An accident happened where the carriage was on the side, and of course you're going, well, they're gonna help them, and of course then the mom's like, I gotta go anyways with or without her, and I'm like, no, does that not strike you odd? And then of course a guy, the father, is going, well, she could stay with me. Like, are
Well,
you
she could stay with
kidding
me.
me? like, no, place her in a hospital. I mean, she got hurt. Clearly, she needs to go and see.
I like how
Obviously.
people. I like how.
Sorry.
You go.
You got to remember that in that day and age, though, doctors were still considered middle class citizens. They were not really paragons of society.
You're like
that. They didn't have to go to med school like for as long as they do now.
Wait.
And so, so the thing is that you have, when you're like a nobleman back in the 1860s, I assume is when this is set, or the very very early 1870s, you had a like physician that you could just have on call and all this stuff. Bringing her to a hospital is kind of low class, and she's like she looks to be like a beautiful young woman of somewhat high status. I mean, she conducts herself very well.
Yeah.
Um,
She seems
so bringing her
learned.
to a hospital would kind of be an insult to her nobility.
It's just so funny to me. It's just like with the way like Jesse had. I love how you just said any noble classman is a doctor, and I was just like, wow. It's just like okay.
Well, they were the only
But
people who could afford to send their kids to learn how to read and
no, yeah,
become doctors. Like, I just want to being literate became popular in
yeah,
the late 1800s, early 1900s.
yeah.
A lot of people were just illiterate because they couldn't afford to go to
To
school.
be, yeah,
Just remember
yeah.
surgeons back then. It's like, I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow to the knee.
I took a scalpel to the knee. Tira in our
So,
audience, Tira in Phoenix, says vampires fought in the Civil War. Source: Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's also a huge reason why a lot of lower class people started to become literate, especially in American culture, is
yeah.
that to get a better life after the Emancipation Proclamation, a lot of Southern Black individuals would start learning how to read and write, and then to follow that lead, white people would also learn how to read and write, so that everybody was kind of on equal footing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just kind of
Yep.
circling back around. Catherine Cosplays, you were mentioning something about a certain story being, or a certain tale being like the story of Carmilla. Kind of, what was it? Met out in the woods. They were like, sorry, my brain's fried today. But
It's okay.
I did have like a brief thought while you were going through that. Can't forget the and then they were roommates.
And then they were roommates.
And then they were roommates. Thank you, Blaze, for saying that.
Oh my
Some of
god,
the
they were roommates.
so
Oh my god. Oh
near the
my
end was an
god.
interesting aspect as well of Carmilla, and that was when they were hunting her. I think that also where they start dismantling the illusion and the aspect that she is this naive young feeble thing, to being, no, this is the monster that's been eating you since you brought her into your room. That kind of thing. And it was such a jarring experience for Laura, that she was, I feel like the rest of the time she was in shell shock the entire time. And it felt weird because she was like, this feels surreal, like how, like am I dreaming, almost, was how I felt that could have been wrote in with her, because I mean she was just so jarred that her friend was doing this to her, that this
I
person that
mean,
said that they cared for her type thing, that sort of thing. And it was,
honestly, I would feel the same, honestly. Because, I mean, it's essentially, if you put it in her shoes, you just like, and you don't see, I mean, some people can be oblivious to signs or anything, or
mm,
anyway, and I can understand that, but at the same time, it's just like you took in and you're like your friend, and then all this other things, and to where it becomes like you're just shocked that this happened. It's a complete 180. It's a complete 180 to you, and it's I mean I would feel the same way, honestly.
it
It would feel
definitely painted the picture for knowing that Laura was never the same again type scenario, that she could never fully recover from this and be that same person she was at the beginning of the story, which I thought was a real interesting, like, life has just smacked you in the face and here's your wake up call, that kind of thing.
Once once you're
Go ahead.
marked by the vampire, things don't ever go back to the way they were. Just
Nope.
saying.
And I think that's something that the author of this book really set home, that this is not the same Laura you met when you first started reading this story. And I think that was something that really gave that character arc, and you can just see the jarring response to it from, where it's ramping up and it's like, well, I'm getting weaker, oh, she's been here, she left and she's back and she's okay, and then it's like, no, your friend's a monster. And we as the reader know who the monster is, and we see it and we just watch it unfold, and just to see it just jar for Laura, and then just start going downhill of how she, just and works into anticipation of what the next move is, and you can tell that Laura doesn't have any clue what the next move is, and she's following the lead of someone else at that point.
Anyone have anything else to add?
I'm just gonna go off of that because it's just because that Ocean. Now that you've compared it to like an abusive relationship, I'm never like now my entire view of this book has changed because you can even view it as like it's at the point when you're in like a terrible relationship where you, the rose-colored glasses finally come off
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
realize, oh my god. And like even like Laura in her conclusion even says like it took years for all of like the um amnesia and like mesmerization to finally like wear off. It took years. And she still hears like Carmilla walking in the next room. Like sometimes she'll wake up in fear hearing somebody walking. It's oh my, it's so interesting. And the one thing that I will recommend, this is like a side note, is that if you can read the audiobook or listen to the audiobook, definitely do, because this book is written as an audio interview.
Hmm.
It is a recorded interview that the doctor is interviewing Laura to get her story of what happened. So it is meant to be heard. Like it is written in that style. Like read it, of course, if you want rather do that, but I would I will always recommend the audiobook because it's meant to be heard in that way.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah, I agree with that, Ocean. I do agree with that now because it's just like it's the fear and it's the aftermath of that, and it's just like the PTSD of or like the trauma where it what if this happens again? It's like you hear it again, like you hear the walking down with the hallways again, and you're just like, no, it can't be. But what if?
Hmm.
Yeah, the thing with that is that I have a different interpretation of what the beginning of the story meant, where Laura gets, gets a little late time visit as a baby. Not a baby, but like a kid.
She's like
Um
6, I
Yeah.
believe, when this
she's
happens.
6. Yeah.
yeah.
Because um like just as somebody who has had traumatic things happen at that around that age, it really messes with you and it makes you more susceptible to things happening later in life. So
Agreed.
the whole time that I'm reading this book, I'm like, oh, we had to have that established at the beginning because like Laura is just letting these things happen because of that thing that happened to her. I didn't even realize that there was hypnosis until somebody said the word hypnosis. Um and yeah, it's just, you know, it's just so important to me that Laura has that like little background knowledge, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because yeah, she was predisposed, that's the word. Predisposed to being in that kind of relationship.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about it is in the narration, it almost depicts that it could happen to anyone, and it did
Yeah.
happen to anyone, and that's kind of the thing, and the idea of the isolation that happened with Carmilla and her, the idea of you know that she was gaslighting as the victim when it came to like say for example the when one of the funeraries were going by and she just screamed it hurts my ears or something along those lines with when Laura was resonating that emotion and wanting to pay homage and respects to the dead in that aspect and the fact that Carmilla was so against it
Well,
was just
at the time, like a vampire is one of the most profane things when it comes to the dead that's like possible, right? Of course,
yeah,
honoring the dead is going to offend them.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But and then in the same instance, not but a couple of, pages later is like we all die. It's like, ah, you're just gaslighting her at this point. How dare?
Yeah.
Like trying to cheapen, I guess in a way, trying to cheapen the death of someone was in a way to devalue that person's life as well was another way of gaslighting that it's all just part of the circle of life and how dare you think that that person was special in some way was is just another one of those like aspects you can almost hear it in that aspect of like you're making a big deal out of a molehill essentially when really it is a big deal. It's a big deal for the parents, it's a big deal for the community, especially for that community and how small and shut in it was. I thought that was actually a really good depiction and picturesque almost of what vampirism is.
And
So,
also the fact that because it was a funeral. Oh, I'm so sorry for
go
interrupting
ahead.
you.
Go ahead.
Because it was a funeral, they were praying. So
Mhm.
that also like she doesn't like the crucifixes or doesn't like the church freaks her out. Like that is another part of that she like hates.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Blaze.
Well, I was. If anybody else has anything to add, go for it. I was going to say, speaking of all of this and how accurate it is to vampire media, from 1 to 5, how campy do you guys think this story was?
I give it 4 out of 5 um Boy Scout campfires because they go to
Stakes.
camp.
Stakes, remember?
Oh, 4 out of 5 steaks for camp.
So, do you think it was? Does that mean you think it was overly campy, or does that mean you think it was better?
I think it was perfectly campy for what it should be. That's why I gave it a 4 out of 5 because it is just the perfect bit of camp. I love it.
I think it's a sprinkle on top.
Goop?
I'm gonna give it a 3. I'm gonna give it that neutral balance. I think it gave the average of the balance of the campy. It wasn't over, but it wasn't under. It gave it a good balance.
Where was
You
I?
gave so you
Oh
gave
yeah,
you
yeah.
gave
I sorry, I immediately remembered.
It's all good.
I would give Carmilla the vampire 4 out of 5 because she's slay. She's so slay. But at the same time, Carmilla the book gets a 2 out of 5 stakes because Carmilla, you got her, man. It's okay. You can stop. You're going a little too camp here. You're gaslighting her too much, and maybe you should diversify your blood stock portfolio a little bit instead of just doing one girl.
Ocean.
There are
She
only so
she should have thought some things through.
There are only
Yeah.
too many. There are not a lot of teenage girls in this area, babes.
Yeah, you need
Yeah,
to find
Jasper.
some other hot singles in your area, dude.
Yeah, Jasper, you tell them. You tell them.
Yeah, person who was alive 150 years ago.
Ocean.
There's a couple of things. For camp, I think I'm going to place it as a 1.5. And the reason being is because as much as it's overdramatic at the beginning, that wouldn't be as profound or pivotal when it comes to it. And the reason why I say camp is I usually take that as to over the top, blah blah blah, drink the blood. Oh, it didn't do that with me. Yes, it did put to light over exaggerations in especially with being a drama queen and in the ideology of that, but I didn't find it campy in the narrative at all when it comes down to how this all worked together and combined. And the reason why I say camping or the reason why I don't give it a higher campy score is because this was not a comedy by any means. In fact, this was a very serious book, in my opinion, when it comes to how the vampirism is portrayed, how it goes from the little nuances and of the vampirism and how it comes out very subtly. While yes, at the beginning it was very, she was very overly animated. That didn't specify to me as being vampiric, and camp to me has to do more with the monster than it does with and how the monster is being portrayed. So for me, I'd give it 1.5 stakes when it comes to camp.
So, how accurate do you lot think it was to vampire media, legends, and lore? Start with Catherine Cosplays. 1 to 5.
I feel like this caused a lot of lore. Like, I don't know. When I think of, because she walks in the sunlight, she eats regular food. Granted, not a lot, but she eats regular food. It follows all of the vampire rules, but it actually adds a couple more. It adds the fangs. It adds the fact that she cannot take on another name that doesn't include all of the letters of her original name. Like, to another family she was Malarca, and in this one, to this family she's Carmilla. Also the fact that, like, they work together. Like, vampires working together. And that they have a type. Also the fact that she had to sleep in her coffin every night. She could not actually get rest anywhere else. She had to be in the dirt of her homeland, which like conveniently enough was like 2 miles away from the Schloss. the slosh, the sloth. I never can pronounce that right.
I
The
always
schloss.
laughed at when the audio said slosh, and I was just like, that's funny.
The castle that they were at. So I am going. So I'm just gonna give high scores all around. I'm gonna be the problem for all of this fucking media. I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5. Like, cause not only did it follow vampire lore, it also made more lore.
Goob.
So I'm also gonna give it. I'm gonna give it a 4.5. I'm gonna give it because I know a lot of lore between the vampire, the folklore between vampires and all that, and like through the evolution of the lore. I thought it was very. I thought it again. What Chris just said. What it gave more lore, and it gave it gave the standards, it gave the fangs, it gave the coffin, it gave the standard name, it gave all that. And I was like, I would agree that it did its job as giving the lore and giving all that and more beyond. So I give it a 4.5.
Jasper.
I would also probably give it a 5 because one of the things I haven't heard yet is that this has the original OG place of bite, which before Dracula was always upon the breast, instead of the neck. Dracula spawned that one. And then also it has all of this is the lore, like this is the OG lore. Um, Dracula kind of turned it a little bit and made it like the solid like picture of the vampire, but like this is the prototype, and I'm kind of here for it, and I really like it.
Ocean.
I'm gonna give it a 4 for accuracy, and the reason being is because mainly the idea of vampirism before it was known as vampirism, which was brought in roughly around the time of Carmilla and Dracula. It gives into a lot of the idea of the inviting in. It definitely shows a lot of the regeneration at the beginning, especially with when she was injured. It gives the symptoms of vampirism with the bite on the neck, like as everyone said. But what it didn't do was give into like say what Bram Stoker's did with the garlic, the silver, and where the crucifix is actually a thing that harms. It did touch on it. It did not go into full detail. One of the other things that it does, it didn't extenuate onto time of day or night with Carmilla, which, as we all know, with vampires and vampirism, you can't step out into the daylight. And I didn't read anything or even um, listen when hearing the audiobook about it describing what time it was. So it was very difficult to determine whether or not this was a vampire or if this was just a person that just is in a weird happenstance. The other idea is that it doesn't go into a lot of the uh, it touches on it, but it was definitely a good beginning. And of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula took it one step further, and since then it's been fleshed out with, say, both of these very, very founding literary masterpieces, in my opinion, um, that it gives throughout the time. And it does go for the longevity of life or the longevity of existence. Can't really call it life because death, you know, and the undead. But it did give kind of that aspect of understanding that this person's been around for a very, very long time without changing. So the whole stasis of time and time freezing around them shows a preservation aspect that I think that made it definitely there, but it doesn't go full into detail exactly what all that does and what that accounts for.
And we had one more. Coffins. Do we
But
remember
we
what
didn't
those
get,
were?
but we didn't get your response.
I will get mine in a second.
Okay. Uh, coffins. What was that for?
Isn't that like if we
Folklore.
Oh wait, we just did folklore.
No,
No,
I'm
the
I'm
entertainment
I got
aspects.
brain.
Wait, is that the
explode.
did we like it? Was it entertaining aspect?
Yeah, it was
Oh, yeah.
entertainment.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
go with
what
that.
it is.
So, we're going to start with Catherine Cosplays.
Oh, 5 out of 5. I fucking love this book. It's so good. It is, for me, it is the quintessential, the OG vampire story. It has everything. It has the loss of innocence. It has the naivety. It has the vampire, man or woman, does not matter. It has the lore of the specific vampire. It has the spooky, the eerie, the scary, the horror, the blood, da 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 blah blah. The old guy who seems to know way too much about vampires who shows up in the third act. Like straight up, I love it. I love it. It's the OG, the quintessential. I will always recommend this. I secretly always recommend this more than Dracula, which is a hot take. But sorry, I'm always gonna recommend this. It's short, it's sweet, it's great. It's perfect. 5 out of 5. I'd give a
Good.
6 out of 5, but I don't think that's fair.
Good.
Okay, so I give it a 3 out of 5 overall because it's a good. Okay, I agree. It's a good book. I liked it. I just there's some things I was just like, I was just like, I didn't think it was a good classic, but I wasn't. It didn't hook me that much as Bram Stoker did. Again, everyone has preferences and all that.
It's okay. You can
No,
you can like
no,
what
no,
you like and
no,
not
I
like
know.
what you not like. It's
No,
okay.
like I'd be like patronized. No. I honestly, it was a good book. It just didn't attract me that much towards the appeal. The ending was good. I agree. The ending was really good. It just didn't hitch me overall. So I give it a 3 out of 5.
Jasper.
I'm hovering between a 3.5 and a 4. I think it was a fairly serviceable book. If I had read it on a physical media, it would probably be a 4, just because I don't absorb audiobooks very well. I think it was very, very entertaining in the I hate to say, and now that we've talked about how it's an abusive relationship, I hate that the whole time I was like, OMG, they're so gay for each other. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should have been a little bit more mindful. But
I'm still gonna be like that.
but I can't deny that the whole time I was reading it, I was like, oh my god, are they gonna kiss right now? Which is entertaining for me. And then the ending comes and you're like, ooh. And it shifts and it becomes entertaining in a different way. Which I'm a fan of. I'll give it a 4.
Ocean.
I give this a solid 4.5. And for what it's worth, it is a good read, although there were a lot of words that I had to look up. Because the vernacular was absolutely for a learned person that it really shows that we have diluted our ability to learn the English language properly. Um, Albeit it was a good, entertaining book. It got a lot of good, entertaining points across. Where yes, it tapped into a lot of the taboos that were of the time, and even now can be considered taboo in that aspect. And kind of the things that you see with kind of an abusive relationship and everything like that. The idea behind it was never, I'm guessing, was never to showcase that it was an abusive relationship, albeit that the vampire is a villain and that they don't do things healthy. I think that was a good take on it. I think from cover to cover, it was an excellent classic, and where yes, the setup may have been a little bit slow, it wasn't going to continue to be slow. The idea that the build up was there, the ideology, and while yes, there were times where even Laura was like, "Are we gonna kiss right now? Is that what's happening?" I mean, that idea is still there, and of course with any relationship it never is abusive at the beginning. So I mean the idea is that it does have some premise of attraction and desire and were muted words where things were left to the imagination in that aspect. Yeah, I could definitely see that, and the fact that the crescendo and the overall plot of the story of it becoming more into Laura's uh, break away from it and to eventually start living her life again outside of Carmilla was another aspect that I think was very, very clear. There was the aftermath, the cleanup, the confronting of the problem is just it was a beautiful and very masterful way of explaining how Laura was going to uh, be able to live past this point. And while yes, there are lingering aspects or affectations such as hearing the footprints, the footsteps down the hallway and waking up in the middle of the night, that that she's eventually. I mean, she's obviously in the aspect of a doctor's um, perspective, being interviewed by a doctor to get kind of a better ideology, shows that the woman, Laura, was seeking help and getting it. So it gave that aspect. But of course, if you look back at the time, it was never really a good idea to go to a sanatorium.
So, one by one, and I will give my ratings here in a minute. We'll get to that. But one by one, without giving explanation, a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being hell yes and 1 being hell no, would you recommend this to someone else? Catherine Cosplays.
5 out of 5.
Goob.
3 out of 5.
Jasper.
5 out of 5.
Ocean.
5 out of 5 on this one. Yes, it was good.
Excellent. Now for me. Was it camp? Yes. But I do enjoy camp. I do enjoy kind of sinking into that depravity. Therefore, this gets a 4 out of 5, but an ecstatic 4 out of 5 for me. Do I think it held up to the lore? I think this defined the lore, so I give this a 5 out of 5 for the blood drops. As for the coffins, I give this a 4 out of 5, and would I recommend this to other people? That is a 5 out of 5. This gets, despite my issues with it, this gets high ratings for me pretty much all around. This was a good story. I enjoyed this. One of the things that I think is that we as a species have forgotten how to tell a story for the sake of telling a story, and I will shout this until I am blue in the face until people listen. because I am billing myself as a storyteller these days. If you want to learn to tell a story, pay attention to the storytellers that came before you. Pay attention to the people who know how to weave a tale and adapt that to your own time. This was a building block. This was a foundational stepping stone for us here on the vampire media side of things. This helped define us. So whatever your thoughts are of this book, of this story, it has its place in history and it has rightfully earned it. Which is why I give it high ratings all around. That being said, I think it's time to bring this episode to a close. So, Catherine Cosplays, you brought us in. Why don't you take us out?
Alrighty, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Catherine Cosplays. Along me with my amazing other co-hosts. Thank you for listening. And remember, what the Camarilla doesn't know won't kill you.
We'll see you guys next episode. Oh, and before we go, just a bit of a treat and a bit of a heads up. Next week, my dears, we're reviewing Queen of the Damned. So if you want to follow along, that's where you're going to find us. See you soon.